Hey, it worked.
So, back in 1775, you all remember the Battle of Bunker Hill?
Oh yeah, we were there.
You know that we lost the war, right? So 2 weeks later, George Washington came out to Harvard Square to take charge of the Continental Army. This is June 16. We lost the battle about June 2 on Charlestown Neck, where the hills were. So George Washington's commission was to get rid of the British, to kick them out of Boston. So now, what happened was Henry Knox came up with the idea of bringing some captured British cannon that were captured in Fort Ticonderoga. They brought them to Boston, slogged through the winter. They set them up on the hill on Dorchester Heights. Now, the neat thing there was they're overlooking the harbor, and he could actually shoot the British ships right out of the water. General Howe found out, he's worried now. He sent some of his troops up to recapture those cannons and get the colonists out of there. And what happened? Wicked snow. So General Howe's troops couldn't make it up the mountain. General Washington held the high ground. The British got out of there within a day or two. They fled. Okay, and that was evacuation day for Boston. They realized that if they didn't get out of there, Washington could blow their ships all out of the water and they'd be up the creek without a ship. So that's what happened. Now, the situation with the roads in our country when the British left was wretched, was one word I heard it described as. The British had some King's roads, not too many in New England. They had some more down Pennsylvania. They did not have a priority in connecting the colonials between towns. There were roads, mostly were widened Indian trails that followed the terrain, and those are the roads that were used. So, right after the war, horseback was the best way to get around. If you had to go to Boston, let's say you had your legislator, you had to go to Boston, you probably went on horseback because the roads were in terrible condition. So the other thing, when the country was founded back in 1655, the law said you had to build your house within 1/2 mile of the meeting house. Of course, the meeting house was the church/town hall back in those days. So most homes were local. They were self-sufficient. Like in Chelmsford, we know that we hired Sam Adams, a cousin of the Adams family, to set up the sawmill and gristmill, and other people, shoemakers, wheelwrights, all these different trades were invited to come into the community, or they were encouraged. You had an in if you had a good trade. And as a result, everybody was self-sufficient. They cooked their own food, they raised their own produce, and everything was very local. So the towns now, they just finished with the war, and they're depleted. And if you wanted to improve a road yourself, say you have a little extra money or extra time, you really couldn't do it without authority from your local government. So nothing really was happening. Also, at this time, we had a new awakening, and everybody, the entrepreneurs were coming out of the woodwork, new inventions, building small factories, mills on streams. And there was a boom now in goods that needed to get around. So commercial wagon traffic was not going to make it through the roads as they existed. Also, stagecoach lines. In 1783, there was a stagecoach line from Boston to New York. So how long do you think it took to get to New York from Boston by stagecoach in 1783? 7 days each way. So here is this is an actual flyer from a stage line, and that's the one that you saw on the agenda, the picture. And so these routes are starting up, but they take forever. There are several routes that you wouldn't believe the time that it took. And the federal government now, they have responsibility for the postal service. So they're supporting the post roads. And the post roads, usually horseback,
They're not good for transporting goods. So the states have an answer to a solution to the problem, starting in about 1792, and the solution is privately funded and managed turnpikes. Now they had tried turnpikes in England, but they didn't use the private method, private enterprise, and they had all kinds of corruption, and it was painful to read. The churches were involved. It was a mess. So this was a clean solution. We have a clean slate, and we need roads desperately, so use people's entrepreneurial spirit to produce better roads, and investors have a chance and high hopes of making some money. That by the way, that was an actual flyer from one of the turnpikes that opened in 1799. It was down in Connecticut. So they started in New England around 1792, and Massachusetts was closer to 1796. Now these are rules for the turnpikes, and it's an eye chart. So I'm going to just step over here, and I'm going to summarize for you some of the highlights. For the Massachusetts, they encouraged construction of brand new roads, and but they were allowed to take over existing roads. They had the authority to do that. They had the right to take land. I'm not sure it was called by eminent domain then, but that's what, in effect what it was. And that was conferred on the corporations. The charter was void unless the road was completed within a specified time. They were allowed toll gates. On average, they were about 10 miles apart, and you had to post signs stating clearly what the tolls were at each toll. Tolls, I had a question earlier, what were the tolls? Well, if you had a four-wheeled carriage and 2 horses drawing it, that was 25 cents for that 10-mile stretch. And if you had, say, a herd of cattle, it would be 1 cent for each cow. Or if you had a group of horses that weren't attached to your carriage, okay, the horses attached to your carriage are included in the carriage fee. But if you had goats or oxen or anything else, you'd pay one penny apiece. Now, you had the power, if you wanted to commute tolls. In other words, you could give your buddies a free break. And we could collect money if somebody tried to evade the toll, and we caught them. That's the secret. Could we catch them? Exempt from tolls, and this is surprising. This has really surprised me, because persons traveling to and from public worship did not have to pay tolls. To and from any mill. Now, if you're in town and you're going to a mill, you don't have to pay the toll. I don't know about mills 2 towns away. I think that's a different story. And if you're an ordinary farm laborer and you're going to work, you didn't have to pay. If you're doing family business within the same town, you didn't have to pay. Or if you're on military duty, you didn't have to pay either. Corporation is penalized for delaying travelers or failure to keep the road in repair. Now that becomes important later, the repair part. And they're required to keep a record of the cost of construction and file it with the government, with the legislature. And an annual statement of receipts and disbursements must be filed. Now that sounds good, okay? That the state can keep track of your performance. And but guess what? They forgot to put any penalty on for not filing. So you can imagine what happened. Anyway, a corporation could be dissolved by the legislature after 20 years. But here's the good news. The corporation may be dissolved when it has earned its original investment plus 12%. So ka-ching, 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 you can make an investment and get 12% back on your money, okay? And generally they estimated it would be 20 years when you get your money back plus interest. So this got a lot of people interested in signing on, in purchasing shares and being a charter member. Those would be the ones that made the largest investment. So in 1793, there was a stagecoach route between Amherst, New Hampshire, where a couple of our people were this morning, and Boston, and they had a stopover with a change of horses right here in Chelmsford. And also in 1793, this bridge, this is a sketch of the original West Boston Bridge, and this is the State House is right here, the Capitol in Boston. And now you could go from Cambridge directly across without having to get on a ferry boat. So now the people from Amherst, New Hampshire, they have a service where they can travel. But guess how long that takes? Okay, 6 hours between each leg. So 6 hours from Boston.
6 hours this morning.
It took you how long?
A little bit. We can't
Six-
see over here.
6 minutes, the way you drive?
Not take us 6 hours.
Okay, sorry about that.
No, not a problem.
Okay, so that West Boston Bridge now makes this an attractive route and an opportunity to build a turnpike. So, what happens? Is our town going to get on board and everybody's enthusiastically going to support turnpikes through town so they get to Boston in a shorter time in 6 hours? No. The town appoints a committee to go to the State House and tell them not to allow any turnpike roads through Chelmsford. So if Paul was here, I was going to ask him if he's the one that appointed that committee. But he had to go to another event. So anyway, that committee failed. The state said, no, we need the good roads. So we're going to ignore you guys, go back to Chelmsford. And the Middlesex Turnpike was chartered in 1805 on June 15 by 6 people. And I'm going to mention 2 of the people on that list because they relate a little bit to the story. The first one is Colonel Ebenezer Bridge. And you all know that Reverend Ebenezer Bridge was our 4th minister here in town, and Colonel Ebenezer Bridge was his son. Now, this is interesting because we claim him as a very important citizen of Chelmsford, but he actually lived in Billerica. I mean, he was so important, and I'll tell you what. During when the Minutemen from Chelmsford went to Concord, they were late. Okay, you remember they got there after they were chasing the British down toward Charlestown. Billerica, okay, Colonel Ebenezer Bridge at the time of Billerica went with his Minutemen. They got notified at 2 o'clock in the morning. They got there early. So they got to Concord. They were assigned to go to Merriam's Corner. Familiar name? So Ebenezer Bridge was at Merriam's Corner with other Billerica men and men from other towns. They ambushed the British as they were taking a left turn going by the Merriam House in Concord. That house is now part of the National Park. The house still exists. Carol and I are supporters. And we have family reunion at the National Park every year. So, Ebenezer Bridge, he was named he was named Colonel by Chelmsford's Lieutenant Colonel Moses Parker. So now Colonel Ebenezer Bridge is assigned to go to the battle at Bunker Hill. Colonel Bridge was wounded. He had a couple of sword wounds in the face, but he survived it. Lieutenant Colonel Moses Parker was not so lucky. He took a musket ball in the thigh. He was captured by the British, taken to Boston. They amputated his leg. He died on July 4th of that year. So that's the story of those 2 men and the relationship. Moses Parker was from Chelmsford. Ebenezer Bridge, after the war, he became Middlesex County Registrar of Deeds. I almost said disease. Registrar of Deeds for almost 20 years. He was treasurer for Middlesex County. And so he was a primary citizen in our county. He was involved in all sorts of affairs. He was also our state legislator at the State House for almost 20 years. So you can see the Colonel Ebenezer Bridge is very near and dear to Chelmsford hearts too. So anyway, he was one of the charter members of this operation. Samuel Swan Jr. His father, Samuel Swan, was one of the incorporators of the Middlesex Canal. Now you say, the Middlesex Canal opened in 1804, and it was a year before this road was even chartered. So you're thinking, I can see your minds thinking, was the canal in competition with the Turnpike? What do you think? How many say yes?
Yes.
How many say no? 2 no. Okay, the no's are correct. The Turnpike was the canal was no competition because the canal carried very heavy loads. Now to get downriver from Lowell to Boston was an 8-hour trip. So if you're a passenger, you had to have a whole day off to make the trip. Now to get back upstream from Boston to Chelmsford, because you're going against the flow going down the canal, 12 hours. So you can see it's much more time efficient to take the stagecoach, especially when we get this Turnpike rolling, okay? This is going to be terrific. Now, this right here is the starting place of the new canal. It's the meeting house in Tyngsboro, and this is how it looks today. It's been recently restored by our own Matt Hansen, who is a former selectman here in town, and he's now manager of the town of Tyngsboro, and he's responsible for restoration. So this building looks here very much like it did in 1805 when the Turnpike was chartered, because it's been restored. It didn't look so good about 10, 20 years ago. So now it starts there. The charter has it going through Chelmsford Center, and then through Billerica Center, and then it's going to a stake on the Billerica-Bedford town line, almost to Burlington. So the rest of it, I'm not going to make you read. I'm going to show you. The rest of it is the same. But what happened is, a year later, they amended the charter. So what did they do? They started at the meeting house. They drew a straight line down to that stake. They bypassed Chelmsford Center, and they bypassed Billerica Center, and they went down to the stake. How many here think that was a good idea?
Yeah.
Nobody. How many think it was a bad idea? Okay, we have a few people that are awake and thinking that perhaps that wasn't a good idea, because if you are a stage driver or a wagon driver, you probably had your favorite stops, your favorite taverns and friends to see. So if they had gone through Chelmsford and Billerica and then down to the stake through uncharted territory with a brand new road, it might have been a better idea. So here's where we go next. We come down this straight line, which is kind of in the middle of nowhere. It's through fields, and it's not connecting with any towns. But there's an angle here, okay? This is an angle of 20 degrees to the right, and there's a stake in Abel Wyman's field. He's a farmer, and it's right on the Billerica-Bedford town line. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell you in today's terms where we're at here, and then I'll explain some of the changes that went before. So the stake, this is Miter Corporation, and the parking lot for Miter Corporation, and then there's a building called ComEd, or EdCom, and the stake in the ground was right there in front of that building. And if you go on Google Earth, you have no trouble finding where that stake was in that 20-degree bend in the Turnpike. Then the next thing on the charter was that they were going to head for some famous rocks in Arlington. And the rocks were right about here. So they headed toward the rocks. and that was on the charter. But then they took a turn. They turned 32 degrees to the left, and they went around a hill. There was a hill. Let me know if I'm in your way here. There was a hill right here that they went around, and the reason that they took that turn and went this direction, they connected with Massachusetts Avenue. So their road took a short, straight trip and connected into a straight stretch of Mass Ave. It came down here. Then you see a 12-degree turn to the right, and that was actually Mass Avenue taking a turn around Spy Pond. So they're still with Mass Ave. Now Mass Ave deviates from a straight line, and this straight line from here down to here, it's a perfectly straight line, and that's all new Turnpike, okay? So why didn't they go straight? If they had gone straight, they would have ended up on a line exactly parallel to this, and they would have ended up almost the same point on the river, just I don't know, like a quarter mile, half mile downriver from where it ended up. Why did they do that? Because they were allowed, and they wanted to pick up more customers and capture some private roads, free roads. They went through Lexington, they captured some roads there and made them free to toll. So what do you think the Lexington people thought of that?
They didn't like it.
Yes, and worse, they hated it. So they went and fought it hard, okay, so they all got free passes. They didn't have to pay, the Lexington people. Then I went into Arlington, on Lowell Street here, and Arlington fought it real hard. And they lost, but they also, certain families in Arlington got free passes. Now what happened at this 32-degree turn here? There's a mountain there, it's called Mount Gilboa today, and they went around it and then cut over so they could hit Massachusetts Avenue on a straight line. And if you look, this is actually, these straight lines are actually covering the entire route. If you go in on Google Earth, the entire route is within that red line. And so they picked up Massachusetts Avenue, which had been a free road, and now they've captured it, and they're going to charge you tolls, okay? And now they've got their own road, and they're going to have a toll house down here, which I'll show you a little bit later. So it ends up into the Cambridge-Concord Turnpike down here, and the Cambridge-Concord Turnpike very shortly goes into that West Boston Bridge that I showed you that just opened up in 1793. So I just had a funny story about the Concord-Cambridge Bridge. They wanted to exercise their powers of eminent domain, so to make their straight line, they wanted to go through a corner of Harvard Yard. So what do you think Harvard did? They fought like hell. So if you look at Google Earth, it's kind of funny. You can see where Broadway Street, which was the Turnpike, actually had to go around Harvard Yard. And now, if you look at Harvard Yard, there is this big, heavy iron gate around the entire yard. So you wonder if these Turnpike guys didn't get that fence going, keep people out. So anyway, that's the route. And why did they make it so straight up here? Well, it turns out, oh, I forgot to mention, the stake in Farmer Wyman's field, at this point, there is a Wyman Street, a part of 62, Route 62 is named for one of the Wyman family, and there's also an elementary school, so the Wyman name lives on in that neighborhood. There was a book published, and it was done by this fellow by the name of Stephen W. Johnson. He was a smart guy. He made a case that turnpikes should all be straight line. Even if you have to go up a hill with a little bit steeper grade, it was worth keeping it in a straight line to save the distance. He also recommended that they have 2 lanes with a break, with a space in between, one for one direction and one for the other direction, which seems like a pretty good idea, but that was totally ignored because that would be way too expensive. So, straight line mania caught on, and they did this ill-advised straight line down here. So that's what happened. It was influenced by a book. If they had followed the original route, they probably would have done a bit better. Okay, so now the Turnpike opens 5 years later in 1810, and this same year they were authorized to go all the way up to the New Hampshire border, which they did as soon as they could, and they connected with the second New Hampshire Turnpike and the Turnpike that connected to Amherst, where the stage could now use. So now we've got a good connection between Amherst, which was actually a seat of government in Rockingham County at the time. So there was a lot of traffic. The mills hadn't really started up in Nashville, Manchester, and so on. So you're talking government travel mostly, and now they can get directly to Boston through the Turnpike. That's great. Okay, so we're going to have a few good years here where the Turnpike's going to get well used. Something happened here in terms of stagecoach technology. There was a company in Concord called Abbott Downing, and they came up with this coach, which was a really good design, and it became the standard for comfort and utility. Believe it or not, until the automobile. These things were still in use when the automobile came around. And you probably remember these from your old Western movies. Well, Wells Fargo Company really likes these coaches. They bought them by the train load and shipped them out west. So those coaches that you see in the movies, in the old movies, the Concord coaches, they were built right up in Concord, New Hampshire. It was an excellent design. Now, if you look at this picture right here, there's about 25 people in that picture on that stagecoach. You show me an automobile that can carry 25 people. You need a pretty good size bus to carry that. So I thought that was kind of fun, and Wells Fargo liked the name so much. In 1901, when the assets of the company were sold, they purchased the name Abbott Downing, and they used it on one of their advisory branches until last year. 120 years, the Abbott Downing name was used by Wells Fargo, and I just looked it up today, and they just merged it, and the name went away. So 120 years that name lived on. Okay, how did your investment do, folks? Well, one of the things that we did in construction, we used a low-cost construction method. We took the dirt, we had to make ditches, we had to make a crown in the road, we had to lower the hills and fill in the valleys. Well, the extra dirt we used in the road, okay? So there were a few roads, like the Newburyport Turnpike, that used gravel they brought in and pounded stone they brought in from elsewhere. Well, we didn't. We used soil. Okay, so you've got a little gravel, you've got a little sand, you've got a little loam, you got some rocky soil, you got lots of rocky soil in Chelmsford. So it was a mishmash. So what does that result in? High maintenance costs. So what happens in the spring? The road turns to mud. You get a cart going down there. They tried to control the width. There were carts that had treads on that were as much as a foot wide for certain loads. So you would get fined if you exceeded the or went too low, because you would sink down. So anyway, it was a real fix-it project, and for this long road, you can imagine the expense of sending crews out every time the mud season came along. So that was working against us. Now, who is our biggest enemy? It wasn't the Middlesex Canal. And I'll tell you, I'll give you a preview. The trains came along in 1835, and they were really fast, and they could go all year round. Mud season didn't affect them. It wasn't the trains. Who was it? Middlesex County, north of Billerica Road, was too high. So that was abandoned, and I mean really abandoned. There's no sign of it today, but I'll show you what does exist. So there, the other street went from Chelmsford Center to, it intersected the Turnpike up toward Vinyl Square, and I'll show you where that was too. And that was in 1839. So that pretty much kills any need for the Turnpike in Chelmsford by 1839. So In 1841, the entire, the charter was repealed for the entire road. So you guys lost your money, I'm sorry to say. I'm sorry we had you invest in this project. Now, these are just two examples of certificates that people bought here, shares, and one of them was the Worcester and Fitzwilliam Turnpike, and the other one was the Worcester and Stafford Turnpike Corporation. And the reason I picked these two Charlotte Hornets was they were purchased by the same person, and his name is, if you can read it, Isaiah Thomas. He plays for the Charlotte Hornets. So this is a map, and I see Jerry did his homework, and he came in toting one of these. So I think I'm going to go over on the other side here and explain this a little bit. As it says here, the whole project wasn't wasted, because look what we got. We have what looks like it's kind of an interstate system, but it radiates out from Boston instead of going around Boston. So this is like a precursor to state and interstate highways. So if you look over here, we have the Salem Turnpike, and that's now Route 107, and that financially was the most successful. Over a 60-year period, they earned 3.1% interest. All the others did worse, and I believe we did much worse. Okay, this is the Newburyport Turnpike. That was very well constructed, and because they spent so much on the construction, they made very little money. But that we know and love as Route 1. So up here, this little jog is the Plum Island Turnpike, and that was the longest surviving turnpike. Can you guess when that finally closed up? 1905. And what they did, first they had the road, so then they had a horse-drawn trolley, or streetcar, going out to Plum Island from Newburyport, and then they had an electric trolley going out to Plum Island Beach. So if you've ever driven to Plum Island, you've driven on the Plum Island Turnpike, and if you took Route 1, you went up to the Newburyport Turnpike. So the Essex Turnpike is here. And that, because I had to travel that so many years to visit my parents in Danvers, and that is now Route 114, and it's not my favorite road because I spent a lot of hours driving on that road. And Route 114, when I was a kid, there was hardly anything on that. It was still an undeveloped turnpike, and it's now starting to fill in with businesses and condos and so on. So this one right here, the Andover and Methuen, Andover and Medford Turnpike, Medford to Andover. This one we know and love as Route 28. And the Middlesex Turnpike is our own turnpike. Now, strangely, this road was never used for either Route 3A or Route 3. Route 3A was built to the east of it, and Route 3 was built to the west, and it did cross over for just a little bit in the Lowell area. So the original road, other than south of Concord River, which is all still in use, never really became part of the state or the interstate highway system. So that was just a little bit of a surprise. This one here is the Cambridge and Concord I told you about, and this is the Westminster, the Union. This one's called the Union. This we know and love as Route 2, but there's a story about the Cambridge and Concord Turnpike here. That had the worst problem with people driving around it. Nobody wanted to drive on that turnpike. So I'm wondering how much the little fracas with Harvard University had to do with people not taking that turnpike. So it was a financial failure, but it still became Route 2. Then we've got the Worcester and It was Framingham and Worcester Turnpike down here, and that we all know as Route 9. So, you can see that there was some value in what was done here. These are the sections that are left now. So if you look here, this is this is the actual straight line that starts at the meeting house in Tingsboro. And although it follows the straight line, the highway couldn't, because it has to go around the Merrimack River. Obviously, you have to follow the train in this particular case. So it went like so. If you notice, there's a road right here, and look where it goes. It kind of parallels the road, but it goes up the hill a bit. And George Merrill and Pat and Judy Metzer were both here tonight. He told me that road, it's called Mission Road, and Ting Road in Tingsboro was built because the highway, Route 3A, flooded. So, and I believe that because back in 2006, I witnessed this road getting shut down because of flooding. So I'm not sure if that was built because the Turnpike developers screwed up, or if it came in later years when... I noticed too that Mission Road is not accepted by the town. So, yeah, so I was surprised. So anyway, we get down here to Vinyl Square, and if you notice, it lines up perfectly with Princeton Street down here. So the straight line truly goes from the meeting house all the way down through. Now the next section is Route 4. Now Route 4 is up here, and it comes down in a perfectly straight line right across, right through the Drum Hill Square, down to Old Middlesex Turnpike Street. So you see, gee, there's a part of the Middlesex Canal that survived. Well, it's not quite true. Okay, this farmland here was developed, and in 1954, this road was accepted. And I suspect that the developer had the information as to where the turnpike used to be, but I don't believe that it was ever a surviving section. I think he did it just for historical interest. So anyway, it lines up pretty well with the straight line. So the next thing is from Old Middlesex Turnpike Street, coming down to Turnpike Road. And you can still see vestiges of it. If you look at Google Earth, you can see places where there's still greenery. Are the Canistreros here tonight? Okay, Ron and Carol Canistrero live on Ideal Avenue right here. And I'm not sure they know that their backyard was the Middlesex Turnpike. I might have tipped Ron off a while back, but because I thought he'd be excited about that. So anyway, it lines up perfectly with Turnpike Road down here. And I mentioned I'd tell you about the toll house now. Everybody thinks, oh, the toll house on the Common, was that the Middlesex Turnpike toll house? No, the toll house for the Middlesex Turnpike actually still exists, and it's in its original location. So this is the end of Turnpike Road right here. And this is Bill Ricker Road. This is Golden Cove Road. Now there's really no sign of the turnpike. It got abandoned big time going up here. Now there was a tavern here. Deb Taverna lives in that house, and this was the town farm. It's now it's a house in desperate need of repair. And this building right here was the toll house. So the road came directly up, and you can see that the house is aligned with the turnpike, and that was the northern toll house in Chelmsford. So there's a picture of it. That's what it looks like today, or back in 2004. And this two-story part was the original toll house building, and everything else, all the porches and garages and additions were put on later. Now I'm going to tell you about the toll house. There was a toll house in Lexington, but I can't tell you where it was because I never found any information on it. And maybe the people in Lexington, they were so upset they burned it. I don't know. Anyway, there's no information on that one. But this one is Beacon Street, and Beacon Street at this time is in Somerville. The town line between Cambridge and Somerville is right here. This was Charlestown. Back while all the time that the Turnpike was in use, this was all part of Charlestown. This road right here goes to Harvard Square, and this is the main route to Charlestown Neck, which is where the Bunker Hill Monument is, and Breeds Hill. So, in honor of Washington's conquest, this is named Washington Street right here. So anyway, the toll house was here on Beacon Street, and that goes out and connects directly to the Mass Pike when it hits Cambridge again, West Cambridge. And this site has deep personal meaning for me. So you're sitting there wondering, where is he going with this? So, back when I was 0 through 10 years old, I lived in that apartment house right there, where the red dot is. This is a Harvard University graduate student housing. This building right here was Scannell's drugstore, and the entrance is right there. That is where I spent my allowance on comic books, candy bars, popsicle sticks. So that's why it's personal for me. I was really surprised when I found out where the toll booth was, that I lived right there so many years. Now we get to the mystery house I promised you. Okay, this one didn't make the mystery house Monday because it actually, the glass negative had a name on it. It said the Driscoll house, the Driscoll place, sorry. So it looks like a typical old farmhouse, very old farmhouse. And this glass negative was taken with a big view camera around 1890 by Arthur Emerson. So it had been a mystery to me until I got into this project. And I discovered that was the house of Lieutenant Colonel Moses Parker. And he's the one that Parker School is named after. He's the one that died after the Battle of Bunker Hill. And so where is it? This surprised me too. This is Turnpike Road right here, okay? Beaver Brook comes ends down here, and River Meadowbrook goes up here. Right here, where that circle is, that's 97 to 103 Turnpike Road. That's where that house was. I never knew that before. So now we're going to go back to the previous slide. This right here is probably the best photograph you will ever see of the Middlesex Turnpike. And I can personally guarantee it's the only color picture you will ever see of the Middlesex Turnpike in the 1800s in Chelmsford. Okay. Right there, that's the Middlesex Turnpike. So that's how it all ties together. Moses Parker's house. Now, the interesting thing was Abraham Parker came to Chelmsford in 1653, before the town was chartered. He wasn't a chartered member, but he was one of the earliest settlers in town. And Moses Parker was his great-great-grandson. Now, the Parkers owned a lot of this land, perhaps all of it. Now, I wanted to point out that this Billerica Road, that was, believe it or not, that was the main route to Boston and Salem. So, when he first moved into town, none of these roads existed, none of them. So he probably had a farm road that went out to Billerica Road, because that road was there when he got here in 1653. So that was really kind of interesting to find out that this was Parker land. Now there were many other Parkers. Some of them went to Groton and became prominent citizens, but Moses Parker, unfortunately, he was a martyr. a very well-known citizen of Chelmsford. And Parker School, of course, is named after him. So, in 1846, the Middlesex Turnpike became a free road. That's it, folks.